Thank you very much for joining us today. This is one of our first transmissions for Hokkei TV, based outside of Japan. Today we have a guest today of Reverend Ryuei McCormick to discuss some basic questions that are usually brought forth from the laity. So we thought with this series we would discuss the differences and similarities between different practices of Buddhism and the many backgrounds and cultures that people come from, to perhaps answer some of their questions as far as what are the main differences between these and others. So today I'd like to welcome Reverend Ryuei McCormick.
Oh. And
today what we're going to first start with on this first series is Nichiren Shu Buddhism and SGI, otherwise known as Soka Gakkai International. So as we know, many people come from Soka Gakkai Buddhism, and then now with the explosion of the internet, more information is made readily available for people. So they're able to do more research than within their own sect or own school of Buddhism. And you know, a lot of questions that come up as a priest from people who come from that tradition is, first of all, is Soka Gakkai practice Buddhism in its essence, because a lot of times we see many differences between that. And also, what are those differences? So today I'd like to begin to ask you, because as you know, my background is not from SGI and is from Chinese Buddhism. However, I had the experience to meet the SGI in Buffalo. And of course, being a monk, I was, of course...
Buffalo, New York.
Buffalo, New York. I was confronted with the questions of the simplicity of the practice and also the lack of information, so I thought. And before we go any further, I'd like to say that we as Nichiren Shu, we understand that within SGI Buddhism, there is a lot of wonderful people. So this is not directed personally towards people, but is more of a doctrinal, informational discussion so that they can perhaps make that decision for themselves. Yeah. So I'd like to first of all have a little background of your experience and how do you say, relationship with SGI.
Well, briefly, excuse me, I'm overcoming a cold, so my voice is a little hoarse. I may be taking some lozenges and stuff throughout this, but my first encounter with Buddhism was with Zen, really, when I was in Catholic high school. And some of the Christian brothers who are our teachers would read to us some Zen stories or little anecdotes, so that got me interested in Zen. And I started reading D.T. Suzuki and Alan Watts, but you know, this was in the suburbs outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so there was no real opportunity for me as a high school student in the suburbs on the East Coast to encounter actual practicing Zen Buddhists. What did happen, however, was that I ran into Soka Gakkai during one trip into the city that I made, and went to this Soka Gakkai meeting that was in an apartment above South Street. South Street was a real bohemian kind of a punk scene area at that time. This is in the mid-80s, 1980s. And I just remember it was like walking into a hive full of bees, you know, this humming sound of people chanting the Daimoku really fast.
Right.
And then they had their discussion meeting and they talked about how you can chant for anything you want, for, you know, a girlfriend or,
right,
or a job or a car. And I just had a really bad impression of this because this was not like Zen Buddhism. In my mind at that time, anything that wasn't Zen wasn't real Buddhism. So this had to be a cult. And then they kept talking about their leader, Daisaku Ikeda, and at the time they were still at Nichiren Shu. And my big impression during that meeting was if I stuck around these people, they would brainwash me and send me to California. But that didn't happen. The U.S. Navy did that to me instead later. But the chanting really, it moved me. The chanting of the Lotus Sutra itself, the chanting of the Daimoku. And so even though I had a bad impression at that meeting, of the Soka Gakkai, and I thought that their understanding of Buddhism was pretty much nil, even though I didn't understand them either at the time. I found myself chanting the Daimoku after that. And, even at that age, I was really enamored with Japanese culture, so I would read, like, the book Musashi by Eiji Yoshikawa.
Right.
And
the famous book.
Right, and there was a reference to the Daimoku in there.
Interesting.
Where a priest was writing the Daimoku on rocks as a kind of memorial for people who had died in battle. I went to see the movie Zatoichi Toyojinbo, the bodyguard versus the blind, what is it? Zatoichi is the blind swordsman.
The blind masseur swordsman,
right,
yes.
Meets the bodyguard. And in that movie, Zatoichi, the blind swordsman, is chanting Daimoku, right? So I would run into these things and I would go, wow, then it must be something real. That it must not be something invented in California, by some guy wanting to make a lot of money, which is what I was thinking.
Right.
So when I got into college, I went to the religion department and talked to the professor who taught Asian religion, Buddhism. I said, what's this all about? Is this for real? And he told me that there was this eccentric monk named Nichiren who came up with his own unique way of practicing and understanding Lotus Sutra. And so, yes, it did go back hundreds of years, and I should take his class and learn more about where it fit into Buddhism generally. So I did that. And at the same time, I was getting into the punk rock scene in Philadelphia. And many of the people that I met in that scene were practicing with Soka Gakkai, or had practiced with them. And some of them quite impressed me as very intelligent, sincere individuals. And I thought, wow, okay, well, maybe there is something to this. Maybe I shouldn't be so quick to judge. So as I was studying Buddhism academically, they said to me, one day, we're having the Nichiren Shu priest is coming down from New York to the Kaikon, the community center, and he's going to do Gojukai, where you take the precept and receive the mandala.
Right.
Why don't you come see this? Since you're, since you're studying Buddhism academically, see a real Buddhist ceremony. So I went there with a friend of mine from the Navy, and ended up, we just kind of looked at each other and said, well, why don't we just receive Gohanzan since we're here?
Right.
So almost kind
That's
of on
when they
a
were
whim.
giving it quite easier.
Exactly. We didn't go through any study program or any preparation. It was just, you're here. These leaders said to us, why don't you receive mandala while you're here? Or Hanzan, keep saying. So we did that, and then we got out and got really drunk and returned back to my parents' place, like, very early in the morning, and woke my parents up, and I said, Mom, Dad, I became a Buddhist last night. They got really excited. I'd never seen them get out of bed so fast. I think they thought I was going to shave my head and join a cult and live out.
Excited in a good way?
Some commune, in a very bad way.
In a bad way?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was intentionally trying to shock them, which was silly of me. But what happened was, after I enshrined, I set up the home shrine, I started chanting. My life did become more disciplined, and I did become more kind of positive. And I think that they saw that I wasn't going to, like, run off and quit school and become part of some Buddhist commune. Yeah, that basically I was just going to live my life, but in a more upbeat way, a more disciplined way. And then I had this Buddhist discipline I was doing, and it seemed strange and weird to them, but it seemed to be helping me. So they accepted it. I think what they didn't expect was that I would stick with it for so long. I remember my mother showing me an article on religious cults and how most people stay in them for only 2 years. The implication being, I know you'll get over this.
Right.
And in a way, she was right. I left SGI after only 2 years. It was kind of a you're fired, no, I quit situation that I won't go into in depth right now. But I was only with them for 2 years, but Nichiren Buddhism stuck with me. Because even when I was with SGI, they had translations of Nichiren's writings.
Sure, right.
Then I found the threefold Lotus Sutra, the Bonokado translation, so I read the Lotus Sutra for myself. And, you know, things didn't add up with what they were teaching through the Shoshu SGI, because they were together at that time.
The leaders were giving you
Right.
information.
They were telling me stuff that just wasn't in the Lotus Sutra. Like,
When-
the Buddha predicted that his replacement would show up in Mappa. You know, well, where is that in Lotus Sutra? It's not there. You know?
Right. When you were in SGI, were you able to, obviously now that the priesthood and the SGI group have split,
Yeah,
at that time,
1991, yeah.
right, were you at that time as a member, were you able to get any information directly from priests or just
No.
from lay leaders? So that's where some of the misinformation was coming
Right.
from.
I was getting the misinformation from the lay leaders, from their periodicals, but at the same time, though, I was going directly to the Gosho, which, you know, granted, their translations have some spin,
Right.
but, you know, it's still the Gosho. There's only so much they can spin it, and they had Burton Watson doing these translations. He's a translator at Columbia,
Right.
you know,
Very
professor.
legitimate, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the Bonokado threefold Lotus Sutra translation has nothing to do with SGI. So,
Right.
you know, I was getting the direct information. And remember, I was at LaSalle University taking a class on Buddhist history in general.
Mm.
So I was on my own researching and learning about Buddhism. So I was getting, you know, I was just going directly to the sources and translation.
Mm.
And that's how I knew that what the leaders in SGI periodicals were telling me wasn't adding up.
Well, you know, and that's what we're really finding out is that with the explosion of the internet,
Yeah.
a lot more information has been available.
Right.
When
Now
I
you
was-
don't need to go to a university library.
That's right. Well, and also you can verify and check a lot of times what leaders are telling you.
Right.
And also, of course, as we talk about the Gosho, we know that as in Nichiren Shu, we attempt to use authenticated
Gosho, right.
correct. And by doing that, we're trying to instill a more historical understanding of Nichiren as opposed to a lot of the influence from during certain movements during the Nichiren.
Some of the excessive original Enlightenment rhetoric.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe we could talk about that a little later. I think it gets a little off track,
Right.
but yeah. And one thing I want to point out about myself is, remember, I was only in SGI for 2 years, so that would have been my freshman, sophomore year in college.
Right.
So it's probably towards the latter part of the sophomore year in college that I left them. I don't remember the exact timeline, but when I left, I started looking for other Buddhist groups to practice with.
Right.
And I started looking for other sources of information about Nichiren Lotus Sutra. So then I learned about Risho Kosekai. I found Nikkyo Niwano's Buddhism for Today, which is a chapter-by-chapter commentary in the Lotus Sutra
Right.
that I've heard is itself based on his reading of Nichiren Shu commentaries
Absolutely.
in Japan. The Risho Kosekai group in New York helped me out a lot, gave me a lot of articles by the well-known scholar of Kamakuran Buddhism, Tamura Yoshiro.
Yeah.
I found out about the Nipponzan Myohoji, and in fact when I graduated college I spent a week with them at their Amherst Peace Pagoda.
Mhm.
But there were no other Nichiren groups in Philadelphia, so when I left SGI I ended up learning sitting meditation from the Shambhala Center, which is associated with Kagyu Tibetan Buddhism. And then I ended up practicing with and joining the One Buddhists, which is a Korean
Yeah, it's the one.
movement
Mm.
that is, I would kind of characterize them as a form of progressive Korean Zen.
Mm.
You know, and I practiced with them, was a member of them up until the point where I really, where I joined Nichiren Shu. So I've actually, unlike some people who've been in SGI and joined Nichiren Shu, my experience with Buddhism started with Zen, detoured in SGI for only 2 years, and then went back to various forms of Zen practice. You know, and then I encountered Nichiren Shu and came to Nichiren Shu. So my sensibility is actually much more, you know, coming from East Asian general Buddhism, Zen, than it is a former SGI member. And I think that makes me very different from some other people.
Right. One thing that, as a monk, I realized that a lot of times the general population that was introduced to SGI a lot of times due to socio-economic backgrounds, weren't able to have available information at that time concerning other types of Buddhism, actual documented, researched papers, information, etc. Now, of course, with the internet, we have all of that available, and so it opens a wide spectrum. So I find that a lot of the people coming from SGI to our temple have done it through their own research.
Right.
But that brings me to another question, because obviously when people, I want to talk first about some of the differences
We should get into
between them. So we're going to just take a break for a moment, and then we'll talk about the differences. So